I am an independent musician, always on the lookout for quiet spaces to record without having to spend a fortune renting a studio. A friend suggested I try an old warehouse in the suburbs, a place that was once used for storage but had long been abandoned, covered in the dust of time. The owner agreed to rent it to me for cheap, and I quickly turned it into a makeshift studio. The warehouse wasn't large. Its rough brick walls, high ceilings with dark wooden beams, and cold concrete floor were all layered with a thin film of dust. I brought in a mixing desk, a microphone, small speakers, and a few makeshift soundproofing panels made of foam, setting up a simple workspace. At first, I loved the silence. No traffic noise, no voices passing by, just the sound of the wind slipping through the tiny cracks in the walls, like a natural ambient soundtrack. I started recording a few songs, mostly acoustic guitar and vocals. The first few sessions went smoothly. The sound was clean, free from outside interference, and I was satisfied with the raw recordings. But after a few takes, I noticed something strange when listening through my headphones. Mixed in with the guitar, and my voice was a faint hissing sound. Not the usual reverb, but something like a compressed, drawn-out whisper that lasted a few seconds before fading. I checked my microphone, cables, and computer. Everything seemed fine. I assumed it was just sound reflections from the brick walls or wind snaking through the cracks, so I reinforced the soundproofing and continued. Yet the hissing persisted, appearing randomly in certain parts of my recordings, like an uninvited guest. One late night, I stayed behind to finalize a song. The warehouse was engulfed in darkness, lit only by the dim glow of my desk lamp and laptop screen. As I played back my latest recording, I heard not just the hissing, but also whispering, low, indistinct, like someone murmuring from a distance. I turned up the volume, pressing the headphones closer to my ears, and froze. It wasn't wind or echoes. It was human-like voices, fragmented, unintelligible, as if a distorted conversation was playing beneath my track. My heartbeat pounded. I ripped off the headphones and looked around. The warehouse was silent, thick with shadows, with only faint light filtering through the high windows. I told myself it must be a glitch or a strange audio phenomenon, but the chill running down my spine wasn't so easily dismissed. Next time, I decided to run an experiment. I brought a more sensitive microphone, placed it in the middle of the warehouse, turned on the recorder, and sat still in the corner. No singing, no playing, just recording the ambient sound. A few minutes passed in silence. Then the hissing began, this time audible in real time through my headphones. It grew louder, stretched out, then morphed into distinct whispers. Multiple voices layered on top of each other, whispering in an eerie, rhythmic cadence. I couldn't understand the words, but it felt like they were speaking to each other, muffled by distance or something unseen. I turned on my flashlight, scanning the warehouse. Nothing, just darkness and a few old wooden crates. The whispering stopped when I stood up, but when I sat back down and restarted the recording, it returned, this time closer, as if someone was whispering right into the mic. Goosebumps covered my skin. My hands trembled as I lowered the volume, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it off. I began to panic. Another night, while recording my guitar, the whispers suddenly cut into the track, not just in my headphones, but audibly in the room. I stopped playing, pulled off my headphones, and heard it clearly. It was coming from the far wall, not through my speakers or gear, but from the cold, solid bricks themselves. The whispering grew louder, the voices overlapping, unintelligible, yet deeply unsettling. I shut down all my equipment, but the sound continued. It hovered in the air, clinging to every dark corner. My chest tightened, my breath quickened. I shouted, "Who's there? Is someone here?" Only my own voice echoed back at me before a brief silence. Then the whispering resumed, stronger. I grabbed my microphone, guitar, and laptop, abandoning my cables and soundproof panels. The whispers seemed to follow me to the door like an invisible wave. I locked up, ran to my car, my heart pounding against my ribs, and drove straight home without looking back. The next morning, I reluctantly returned to collect the rest of my things. I stepped in quickly, avoiding the urge to turn on the recorder, just wanting to grab my gear and leave. The warehouse was silent, as if nothing had ever happened, but the air felt heavy, like unseen eyes were watching. I didn't hear the whispers this time, but when I checked my final recording at home, they were still there, louder, clearer, and terrifying, mixed in with my guitar, like an unwanted duet. I deleted everything, unwilling to keep even a second of that sound. Ending, I abandoned the warehouse immediately. I called the owner, telling him it wasn't suitable for recording, and returned the key, keeping the details vague to avoid sounding insane. The hissing and whispers had made it impossible to continue working there. I moved my setup back to my cramped bedroom, not ideal, but safe and free from anything unnatural. Every time I think of the warehouse, a shiver runs down my spine, making me wonder what those whispers really were. A technical glitch, an illusion from isolation, or something I didn't dare acknowledge. I don't want to find out. Now, I avoid old abandoned spaces, preferring to make music in an environment I can control. That warehouse is now just a cold memory, a place where sounds that didn't belong to me once echoed. And I hope they remain silent forever. I am an interior designer, specializing in reviving old houses into spaces that blend modernity with their original charm. When I discovered this house, I was immediately drawn to it. It was small, 2 stories high, with an attic tucked under a slanted roof, its brick walls faded with time, and frosted windows covered in a thick layer of dust. The rent was surprisingly cheap, and I thought it was the perfect place to both live and work. I moved in with a few boxes, my drafting table, and a laptop, and started measuring and sketching renovation ideas. The attic intrigued me the most, a narrow space accessible only by a foldable ladder from the second-floor hallway, with an old wooden hatch and a loose, rattling lock. When I first opened it, I found it empty, except for a few decayed cardboard boxes and a thick layer of dust that coated the floor like a gray carpet. I planned to turn it into a storage area or a small workspace, but I hadn't started yet, being occupied with my clients' projects. Everything began on a late night, while I was sketching designs in the downstairs living room. Light footsteps echoed from the ceiling, slow, steady, as if someone were pacing back and forth in the attic. I stopped drawing and looked up. At first, I thought it was just the wood contracting due to temperature changes, common in old houses. But the sound wasn't random, like creaking wood. It had a rhythm, like someone purposefully moving. I stood up, and the noise stopped. When I sat back down, it resumed, clearer this time, as if waiting for my reaction. My heartbeat quickened. I told myself it could be a rat or a squirrel that had sneaked in, though the sound was much heavier than any small animal. I decided to check, just to put my mind at ease. I grabbed a flashlight, pulled down the ladder, and climbed up. The hatch creaked open, sending a gust of stale wood and dust into my nose. I swept the light around, nothing but old cardboard boxes, some splinters of wood, and cobwebs hanging in the corners. No footprints, no animal fur, no signs of intrusion. I tapped on the floor, checking for any hollow spots, but everything was solid. I stood there for a few minutes, listening. Absolute silence. I closed the hatch and climbed back down. But the moment I sat back at my desk, the footsteps returned, this time faster, as if someone was rushing back and forth. My heart pounded. I bolted up the ladder instantly, but once again, the attic was empty. Not a single thing was out of place. A creeping unease settled over me like an unseen shadow. Over the following days, the footsteps became more frequent, not just at night, but even in broad daylight. I was measuring the walls downstairs when I heard them thud, thud, like someone pacing above me. I climbed up countless times, sometimes recording with my phone, but I never captured anything besides the dusty, lifeless space. The attic window was tightly shut, with no signs of tampering. I rummaged through the old boxes, only crumpled papers, invoices from decades ago, and worthless knickknacks. There was no logical explanation, yet the sounds persisted. They had a strange rhythm, sometimes slow, sometimes frantic, as if trying to convey a message I couldn't understand. A sense of being watched began to seep into my daily life. Whenever I was home alone, I felt unseen eyes peering down from the attic. I often found myself glancing at the ceiling, waiting, and whenever the footsteps resumed, an icy chill ran down my spine. One evening, while chopping vegetables in the kitchen, I heard the wooden floorboards creak above me, this time not pacing, but as if someone were standing still, pressing weight onto the floor. Knife still in hand, I rushed up the ladder. The attic was unchanged, empty, motionless. But I started noticing other strange things. The hallway light flickering despite being newly replaced, the attic hatch sometimes slightly ajar, even though I was sure I had locked it. I tried to coexist with it, convincing myself it was just the quirks of an old house, but the tension kept building. I slept poorly, waking up at odd hours to indistinct noises, footsteps, creaks, or just my own breath in the silence. I confided in Lynn, a close friend. She suggested installing a camera in the attic to see what was really happening. I bought a small camera, placed it on top of one of the boxes, angled towards the floor, and let it record overnight. The next morning, I reviewed the footage with a mixture of curiosity and dread. There was nothing unusual on screen, only dust floating under the camera's automatic light. But the audio told a different story. Distinct, steady footsteps echoed in the recording, even though the attic was visibly empty. A cold dread washed over me. I couldn't understand what was happening. I took the camera down, unwilling to investigate further. I wrapped steel wire around the hatch lock, securing it as tightly as possible. But the footsteps still crept through, fainter now, as if restrained, yet unwilling to disappear. The stress started wearing me down. I struggled to focus on my designs, constantly distracted by the noises above. I considered leaving, but my lease still had 6 months left, and I had already invested money into renovations. I stayed, trying to drown out the sounds with loud music, wearing headphones while working. But every time the house fell silent, I could hear it again, not constant, but frequent enough to keep me on edge. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a divided space, with the attic as a territory I could not control. Conclusion: I still live in the house, though it no longer feels like home. The footsteps in the attic persist, unexplained, and the feeling of being watched clings to me like an unwanted presence. I no longer go up there, keeping the hatch tightly locked with wire, avoiding looking at the ceiling unless necessary. I don't know what it is, the sound of aging wood, hidden animals, or something beyond my understanding. I live with it, always cautious, counting down the days until my lease ends so I can leave. The house remains my workspace and shelter, but the attic has become a forbidden zone, a mystery I dare not unravel. I have accepted this unease, even as it gnaws at me bit by bit, waiting for the day I can walk away and finally forget the relentless footsteps above. I moved into a digital commercial building at the beginning of the month to set up an office for my small consulting business. The rent here was surprisingly cheap, an exciting opportunity for me to start my business on a tight budget. On the day I signed the lease, as I stepped through the main lobby, I felt a cold draft seep through my coat. I assumed it was just the building's outdated ventilation system. The first 2 weeks passed uneventfully. I was busy finding clients and organizing my work. My office was small, with only one window overlooking a dark, shadowy alley. The hallway leading to my office was long and narrow, with cracked floor tiles, peeling paint on the walls, and dim overhead lights that flickered as if they were about to die. I spent most of my time typing on my computer, making calls, and trying to build a solid foundation for my company. Everything started to change one evening when I returned late to finish an important report. A low whispering sound echoed from outside my door, as if two people were conversing in hushed tones from a distance. I couldn't make out the words, just the vague, lingering murmurs. When I stopped typing to listen, the whispers ceased. I thought it might be the sound of pipes or noises from the upper floors. Old buildings often creak and groan. I stood up, opened the door to check. The hallway was pitch dark, with only the weak, flickering glow of an emergency light at the far end. There was no one there. I stepped out, listening for a few more seconds, but the silence was suffocating. Shaking my head, I returned to my desk, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But the next night, the whispering returned. This time, while working, I heard the faint voices again, muffled as if coming from behind thick walls. I turned on the hallway light, stepped out, and checked every corner, but there was nothing. Just the cold air and a faint, musty smell. As I locked my office door, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. Every night after that, the whispers came back. They were never loud, never clear, always lingering just out of reach, sending chills down my spine and making my stomach twist with unease. I started watching the door, waiting for the sounds to stop, but they never did. It felt like a cruel, lingering joke. On a particularly dark Friday night, I stayed late to complete a major project. My floor was completely empty, and most of the hallway lights had dimmed, leaving only the emergency lights casting a faint red glow. The whispers returned, longer this time, closer, almost as if someone was standing right outside my door. My heart pounded as I tiptoed towards it, pressing my ear against the cold wooden surface. Beneath the faint hum of the ventilation system, I could hear the strange rhythm of short, clipped sentences, like a secret conversation. Taking a deep breath, I yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. The air was heavy, pressing down on my shoulders. I walked toward the elevator, hoping to see someone, anyone, but the entire building was silent, like a forgotten tomb. I hurried back to my office, locking the door tighter than ever, forcing myself to focus on my work, despite my trembling hands. That weekend, I tried to convince myself it was just old pipes or some natural quirk of the building. But the unease didn't leave me. I mentioned the strange sounds to the security guard during his rounds, but he only chuckled, saying old buildings always made noises. Then, with a smirk, he added, "Maybe it's a ghost." I forced a laugh, though I didn't find the joke amusing. A few nights later, the whispering returned as I was packing up. This time, I felt more determined than afraid. I grabbed my phone, opened the voice recorder app, and stood by the door, trying to capture the sounds. The whispers seemed a little louder, as if they were trying to say something. But when I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, they vanished completely. I checked every door on my floor, locked, dark, silent. When I replayed the recording, all I could hear was static and faint rustling, no clear voices. The stress was getting to me. My sleep became restless, my mind clouded by the unexplained noises. Then I started feeling something else, the unsettling sensation of being watched as I walked down the hallway at night. I glanced around, but there was nothing, just peeling wallpaper and flickering lights. The feeling wrapped around me, making my skin crawl. My breathing grew shallow. I quickened my pace, pressing the elevator button harder than necessary, just wanting to leave as fast as possible. One evening, I decided to check the other floors, hoping to find someone. An employee working late, a security guard, anyone. When the whispers began, I left my office and climbed the stairs to each floor. They were all dark, empty, their doors tightly shut. By the time I returned to my floor, the whispering had disappeared, leaving me with a mix of disappointment and unease. My head throbbed, sweat trickled down my back despite the cold air. The fear grew worse. If I worked past 6 p.m., anxiety set in. I constantly checked the clock, my heartbeat accelerating as the hour approached, as if my body had learned to anticipate something dreadful. I wanted to leave earlier, but my workload wouldn't allow it. One night, I brought a flashlight for comfort. When the whispers returned, I stepped into the hallway, gripping the flashlight tightly. The moment I turned it on, the beam flickered and died, leaving only the red emergency lights. I swept the light around, but the whispers seemed to swell for a brief second before stopping abruptly. A creaking noise echoed from the ceiling. I pointed the flashlight up, but saw only old ceiling tiles. I bolted back into my office, slamming the door shut, my heart pounding like a drum. The tension was unbearable. I considered reporting it to the building manager, but I doubted he would take me seriously. No one else had mentioned anything, so I kept silent. Another night, as I was shutting down my laptop, the whispers returned, closer, right outside my door. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera, and recorded the door, hoping for proof. The moment I pressed record, the whispering stopped. I stood there for almost a minute, my pulse hammering in my ears, but nothing happened. I stopped recording, frustrated, and decided to leave. As I stepped into the hallway, my hands clenched into fists, bracing myself for something unseen lurking in the shadows. In the end, I realized I couldn't keep enduring this. The constant feeling of being watched, the whispers with no source, and the lack of answers were wearing me down. I began looking for a new office space that weekend. I didn't want to break my lease early, but I knew I couldn't stay in a place that made me feel this uneasy all the time. I needed clarity for my work, and here I could find no peace. Conclusion: I haven't left yet, but I'm planning my move as soon as possible. Each day, I pack away a few more things, trying to finish my work before anything unknown happens. If the whispers return, I force myself to ignore them, though my body still reacts. Palms sweating, breath hitching, mind racing. I just keep looking forward to the day I can finally hand in my notice and move to a normal office. Until then, I have to endure this lingering tension and the unsettling knowledge that something is not quite right in the hallways of this building, a mystery I neither wish to solve nor understand. I started working the night shift at a large parking garage. The job seemed easy and simple. Sit in a tiny office, monitor the security screens, listen to the faint static of an old radio, and rely on a cheap desk lamp that flickered unpredictably. The garage had multiple floors above ground and 2 underground levels, but I never expected that the second basement would become a haunting memory I couldn't erase from my mind. It all began when I noticed that the cameras in the second basement frequently suffered from interference. The images on the screen flickered, blurred, and occasionally I would catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing near one of the concrete pillars. At first, I assumed it was just a technical glitch. Old surveillance systems often had issues, especially in damp, low-ventilated areas like the basement. But the phenomenon kept repeating itself, always around the same late hours, usually between 1 and 2 a.m. The figure resembled a human, but it was never clear, just a faint, hazy outline, like a ghost concealed within the static. I began to feel uneasy, unable to shake the growing sense of dread. Determined to check for myself, I left my office, grabbed a flashlight, and took the elevator down to the first basement before walking down the cold concrete ramp to the second. The air was heavy and cold, carrying the scent of oil stains and damp concrete. The dim overhead lights flickered, casting deep shadows that seemed eager to swallow everything whole. I approached the concrete pillar where the figure had appeared on the camera, sweeping my flashlight around. But I saw nothing except the rough concrete surface and a few dark oil stains on the floor. However, as I turned to leave, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye made me freeze. I spun around quickly, aiming my flashlight into the darkness, but there was nothing. Just silence, pressing in from all sides. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, sweat forming on the back of my neck despite the chilly air. I walked around the basement, inspecting every pillar and the few lonely parked cars, but I found no sign of anyone. Still, the unease never left me. The air felt thick, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. Then I heard it, a faint scraping sound like the slow drag of a shoe against the concrete floor. It was soft, but unmistakable. I called out, "Is someone there?" But only my own voice echoed back, bouncing eerily in the empty space. Then, inexplicably, a sudden draft of cold air brushed past me, even though there were no windows or ventilation openings in the basement. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and I felt the distinct sensation of being watched from the shadows. My pace quickened as I made my way back to the elevator, glancing over my shoulder repeatedly, half expecting something to emerge from the darkness behind me. I reported the incident to my supervisor over the radio, but he merely shrugged it off, his static-laced voice dismissing it as a camera malfunction or the effects of exhaustion from working late. He told me to keep monitoring and not to make a big deal out of it, but the interference didn't stop. Every night, as the clock struck those late hours, the screen would distort, and the shadowy figure would reappear, standing silently near the concrete pillar. I started dreading my basement patrols. Every time the elevator dinged and the doors opened to that level, my skin crawled, my throat went dry, and my grip on the flashlight tightened as if it were a lifeline. I would scan every inch with my beam of light, but I never saw anyone. Sometimes I would hear distant footsteps, light but deliberate, enough to send my pulse racing, or the faint scraping noise again, but whenever I checked, everything was empty. One night, I decided to confront my fear. I stood in the second basement at the exact time the interference usually occurred. Near the concrete pillar, I held my flashlight low, trying to steady my breathing despite the rapid pounding of my heart. The air was unnervingly still, the familiar scent of oil and damp cement thick in my nostrils. Then the scraping noise echoed again, clearer than ever, slow and deliberate, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my grip, but there was nothing. Then a gust of freezing air rushed past me, strong enough to make me shudder and send every hair on my body standing on end. I called out, "Who's there? Show yourself." But the only response was silence, heavy and oppressive. A primal fear overtook me, an unshakable sense that I needed to leave immediately. I bolted for the elevator, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly in the darkness, but nothing ever appeared. Back in the office, I rewound the security footage. As expected, the screen had been heavily distorted, and the shadowy figure had appeared right near my position. But the terrifying part was that in person, I had seen nothing. Not a single movement, not a trace of anyone. This realization sent a deep chill through me, as if whatever it was only existed within the camera's signal, invisible to the naked eye. I replayed the footage multiple times, zooming in, but the figure remained indistinct, forever trapped within the static, like a lost spirit caught between worlds. After that night, I avoided staying in the second basement for too long. When patrolling, I would rush through, checking each corner briskly, never lingering. Every time the elevator doors opened to that level, I would tense up, gripping my flashlight tightly, ready to retreat at the slightest sound. I told my colleagues and my supervisor about what I had seen, but they barely reacted. Some laughed, others waved it off as paranoia or technical glitches. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. The scraping sounds, the sudden gusts of icy air, and the shadow on the monitor were real. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. Ending. I still work the night shift, but I remain on high alert whenever the late hours arrive. I no longer try to understand what it is, whether it's a hidden intruder, a bizarre camera malfunction, or merely the tricks of an overworked mind. But every time the interference returns, Adrenaline surges through my veins, and the second basement remains a place I never want to stay in for long. I do my job, complete my rounds, but I always keep an eye on the clock, counting down the minutes until whatever lurks in the darkness lets me pass. The second basement is no longer just part of the parking garage. It's an unsolved mystery, a presence I dare not confront, and perhaps never will. I am Daniel, the manager of a small construction materials warehouse on the outskirts of town. This place is nothing special, just a gray concrete block with towering metal shelves, a few flickering fluorescent lights, and a tiny front office filled with the smell of old paper. My job is simple: keep the warehouse organized, check the inventory, and make sure the numbers on paper match reality. During the day, I work with a few others, but sometimes I have to stay late at night to take stock. That's the quietest time. No distractions, just me and the piles of cement, nails, and steel bars. Everything started on a late night when I was alone in the warehouse. It was cold, and the air was thick with the scent of dust and metal. I locked the main door carefully, pulling the heavy iron latch to make sure no one could get in. Then I turned off the unnecessary lights, leaving only a dim yellow glow from the fluorescent bulb above my workstation. The light buzzed softly, blending with the hum of the mini fridge in the break corner, creating the familiar background noise of the warehouse. I grabbed the inventory sheet and a flashlight. Some corners were too dark, and the overhead lights couldn't reach past the towering shelves. I started my work, counting cement bags, checking boxes of nails, noting down the number of steel bars. Everything was normal until I heard the first sound. Footsteps, not just a vague noise or the creaking of the floor due to the cold, but clear, heavy footsteps, like someone wearing hard-soled shoes taking 3 or 4 steps on the concrete floor. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, my heart pounding. Who could be here? The door was locked, and only the owner had a spare key. I raised my flashlight, sweeping the beam towards the narrow aisle lined with ceramic tile boxes. Nothing, just darkness and stacks of boxes. I stood still, holding my breath, listening. Only the buzzing of the light remained. Maybe it was just my imagination, or the echo of my own footsteps, I told myself and continued counting. But not long after, the footsteps returned. This time, louder, closer, as if someone had just walked past the aisle I had checked. I spun around quickly, my flashlight scanning every corner, but the aisle was still empty. A chill ran down my spine, sweat beading on my forehead despite the freezing air. I shouted, "Who's there?" "This is a restricted area." My voice echoed against the concrete walls, but no one answered. I walked slowly toward the aisle, checking the back door. It was still locked, the rusty bolt untouched. I returned to my workstation, trying to focus on the inventory sheet, but my mind was in chaos. Then, for the third time, the footsteps came. This time, firm and deliberate, as if someone was walking straight toward me with clear intent. The sound came from the very aisle I had just stood in. My blood ran cold. The hairs on my neck stood on end, my hand gripping the flashlight trembling. "Who's in here? I'm warning you." I shouted louder, my voice shaking with fear. The footsteps stopped abruptly, as if my words had cut them off. The warehouse fell into absolute silence. No wind, no buzzing light, only the deafening thump of my own heartbeat. I stood there, waiting for a shadow to appear or the sound of someone running away, but nothing happened. I tried to steady myself, taking deep breaths, but my legs felt like they were nailed to the floor. Determined to check one last time, I stepped toward the aisle, my flashlight sweeping over every shelf, every dark corner. Still, no one. I turned back to the main area, hurriedly jotting down the last few numbers, desperate to finish and leave. But then, a different sound shattered the silence. A loud crash, like something heavy falling to the floor. I jolted, rushing toward the source of the noise near the tile storage area. A large box of tiles had toppled from a shelf, smashing open, scattered white shards covering the concrete floor. I looked around, my heart pounding wildly, but there was no one. No wind, no footprints, nothing to explain why the box had fallen. My hands trembling, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures. Broken tiles, shattered box, as if trying to gather evidence, though I had no idea what I'd do with it. At that moment, real fear gripped me. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my things, switched off all the lights, locked up the warehouse, and rushed to my car. Driving home, my mind spun with unanswered questions. The footsteps, the fallen tiles. Was someone messing with me? Or was I just exhausted? But deep inside, I knew something strange had happened in that warehouse that night. Something I couldn't explain and had no desire to return to find out. I am Daniel, living in a high-floor apartment in an old residential building. My apartment is at the very end of the hallway, a quiet and hidden corner. Across from me is another apartment that, according to Carlos, the building manager, has been vacant for months. At first I didn't mind. An empty apartment meant no crying babies, no blaring TVs, no clattering footsteps. For me, that was a blessing. But then, strange sounds started creeping into my life, especially during the quietest moments of the day. The first time I heard knocking, soft, like someone testing the doorknob or tapping on the wall with their fingertips. I stopped in the hallway, tilting my head to listen. The knocking lasted a few seconds before fading into heavy silence. I told myself it might be an echo from the floor below, or just my imagination after a long, tiring day. But after that, the sounds became more frequent. Knocking, faint metallic clinks, and sometimes the soft patter of footsteps, as if someone was walking barefoot on wooden floors. They weren't loud, but clear enough to startle me, especially when I was certain no one lived in the apartment across from mine. I decided to bring it up with Carlos. One morning, I knocked on the management office door, described the strange noises in detail, and asked if someone had broken into the vacant apartment. Carlos, ever calm, checked it that very day and called me back. He assured me that the door was still locked, the lock untouched, with no signs of forced entry. It's probably just the pipes or the ventilation system, he said, his voice flat like a rehearsed response. But I didn't buy it. The knocking I heard wasn't the soulless clatter of metal or rushing water. It had rhythm, intent, like the sound of a person. To ease my mind, I started gathering evidence. One night, when the knocking echoed again from the empty apartment, I quietly took out my phone and switched to video mode. Standing in the hallway, I aimed the camera at the apartment door and waited. The knocking came. 3 slow, deliberate taps, and I caught it on video. But when I played the recording back, one detail sent a chill through my body. On the wall beside the apartment door, under the dim hallway light, faint marks were visible. They looked like handprints or scratches, not distinct, but enough to notice that they were new. I swore they hadn't been there last week. I took the video to Carlos, pointing at the marks and asking, "What about this?" He shrugged, dismissing them as natural wear on old walls, then promised to have the building systems checked. But nothing changed after that. The noises never stopped. They didn't follow a schedule. Sometimes they came, sometimes they didn't. But they were frequent enough to carve a deep unease into my mind. Some days, as I walked through the hallway, I felt a cold draft brush against my neck, as if someone were standing behind me, watching. I began losing sleep, lying in bed with my ears strained, waiting for the next knock, the next footstep. The faded marks on the wall haunted me. They weren't clear, but the more I stared, the more they resembled handprints rather than random scratches. I tried to live normally, going to work, coming home, but every time I stepped out of my apartment or returned, I felt an invisible weight pressing down on my shoulders. I had thought about moving out, but then convinced myself that running away from something unexplained was cowardly. Ending, I'm still in my apartment, but my sense of security has long disappeared. The sounds from the empty apartment continue, sometimes faint, sometimes distinct, as if reminding me that I am not truly alone. Carlos hasn't found an explanation, and I don't have enough evidence to force him to break the door open. I've learned to live with the unease, always glancing over my shoulder in the hallway, gripping my keys like a useless weapon. The vacant apartment remains there, silent, yet filled with mystery, like a puzzle without a solution. And I remain trapped in my own home, caught between doubt and either. I am Daniel, working at a small supply company where I spend my days buried in paperwork, blueprints, and occasionally assisting with shipments from the storage room behind the office. The office itself is nothing remarkable, just a few old wooden desks, a worn-out fabric sofa in the corner for guests, and a large glass door leading to the storage room. The storage area is much larger, filled with towering metal shelves, stacked with document boxes, rolled-up blueprints, and various scattered materials. I usually work regular hours, but sometimes I stay late to finish projects or conduct inventory checks. Everything started one evening when I was alone in the office. Night had fallen, and the fluorescent lights flickered weakly. I was standing near the glass door leading to the storage room, holding a stack of papers, my eyes scanning the numbers. Suddenly, in the blurred reflection of the glass, I caught a glimpse of a figure, not distinct, just a faint shape, as if someone was standing silently in the storage room right behind me. My heart skipped a beat. I turned around instantly, but the room was pitch dark and empty. Only the rows of shelves stood still under the dim yellow light of the hanging ceiling lamp. I told myself it was probably my own reflection, but the angle was wrong. I had been standing slightly sideways, while the figure stood upright. A chill ran down my spine, and I instinctively tightened my grip on the stack of papers. I stepped closer to the glass, pressing my face near it to peer into the storage room. The weak light barely illuminated the nearest shelves, while the deeper sections were swallowed in thick darkness. No one, no movement. I turned back to my desk, trying to shake off the unease, but then a sound broke the silence, a faint noise like a cardboard box being shifted on a shelf. I shot up from my chair, stepping toward the glass door again, my eyes straining. Everything was still, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes watching me from within the shadows. The next time, I had to go into the storage room to check on a batch of blueprints. The air was cold, thick with the scent of old paper and metal dust. I had just opened a box when I heard footsteps, soft but distinct, like someone tiptoeing on the concrete floor. I froze, holding my breath. Then, right before my eyes, a box on a nearby shelf slid sideways, not falling, just shifting a few inches, as if nudged by an invisible hand. My breath hitched. I fumbled for my phone, switching on the flashlight and sweeping the beam across the room. Nothing. The shelves stood firm, motionless, with no signs of disturbance. I rushed to check the storage room's entrance, locked tight, the rusted metal latch still in place. But my heart pounded wildly, and cold sweat beaded on my skin despite the freezing air. I am not superstitious, but what was happening defied any logical explanation I could think of. I tried to continue working, but every small noise, the buzzing of the fluorescent lights, the wind whistling through the door gap, sent jolts through my nerves. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, as if someone or something was hiding in the dark between the shelves, observing my every move. I began avoiding the glass door, afraid that if I glanced at it, I would once again see that faint figure standing there. After several such incidents, I made a decision. I would never stay late at the office alone again. The shadow in the glass, the footsteps, the shifting box, none of it made me feel safe in that familiar space. Once night fell, I didn't know if my mind was playing tricks on me after long work hours, or if something truly strange was lurking in the storage room, but I had no intention of staying to find out. Ending, I changed my schedule to avoid working late. Everything was arranged to be completed during the day, or if I absolutely had to stay, I made sure to have a colleague with me. The storage room remained a place I had to visit for documents, but I moved quickly. No lingering, no looking back in that cold, unsettling space. I had no explanation for the shadows and sounds, but I knew one thing. I didn't want to face them again. Work continued as usual, but I felt relieved knowing I wasn't alone at night. Still, every time I passed the glass door, I couldn't shake the feeling of an invisible gaze following me. And I wondered, had I truly escaped it? I am Daniel, an ordinary office worker, often staying late to race against urgent project deadlines. One evening, I lingered to prepare for an important presentation the next morning. I chose a meeting room, referred to by everyone as the showroom, to check my slides and the projector setup. The room wasn't large, just a long table surrounded by fabric-covered swivel chairs, a ceiling-mounted projector, and large windows overlooking the building across the street. I switched on the fluorescent lights, plugged my laptop into the projector, and began working in the eerie silence of the nighttime office, where the only sounds were my own breathing and the soft hum of the air conditioning system. At first, everything was fine. I went through the slides, adjusted the projector brightness, when suddenly a cold draft swept through the room. Not the mild chill from the air conditioner, but a bone-deep, piercing cold, as if someone had flung open a door leading straight to the Arctic. I stopped, looking up in confusion. The windows were shut, the curtains still, no air movement whatsoever. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and then I felt it. A strange pressure on my right shoulder, icy, like a frozen fingertip pressing through my shirt. I turned sharply, but there was nothing behind me except my own warped reflection in a dimly lit glass. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to dismiss it as exhaustion and returned my focus to the screen. I resumed checking my slides, but before long, a sound broke the silence, a faint scraping noise, like a chair dragging across the floor. I looked up and immediately noticed that a few chairs around the table had shifted out of place. Not by much, just a few inches, but enough to break the neat arrangement. Then, it happened again. The scraping sound echoed from multiple directions at once, as if an unseen force had simultaneously nudged them all. I shot to my feet, scanning the room. No wind, no vibrations, nothing that could explain it. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead, my hands trembling as they rested on the table. I told myself it could be air pressure, but the excuse felt hollow even in my own mind. I walked around the table, checking each chair. They weren't touching each other, and the carpeted floor made it impossible for them to slide on their own. I sat back down, trying to concentrate, but the cold lingered, clinging to the air, making my breath visible in thin, misty puffs. Then came a small but sharp sound, click, as if a pen had dropped onto the floor. I bent down, searching under the table and chairs, but found nothing. The sound had come from nowhere. A tightness pressed against my chest, like an invisible hand squeezing, making it hard to breathe. Desperate to shake off the unease, I stood up and began practicing my presentation aloud, hoping the sound of my voice would drown out the oppressive silence. But mid-sentence, the scraping noise returned, louder, more deliberate. I turned just in time to see the chairs shift again, this time unmistakably out of place, some even tilting as if shoved forcefully. Panic surged through me. I backed into the table, pain shooting through my hip, but I barely noticed. My hands fumbled as I yanked the VGA cable from my laptop, clutched my documents to my chest, and bolted for the door. As my fingers reached the light switch, the fluorescent lights flickered once before stabilizing, almost as if the room itself hesitated to let me leave. I didn't look back. The door slammed shut behind me with a resounding bang that echoed through the hallway. The corridor felt normal, warmer, calmer, but I was shaking, as if I had just escaped a nightmare. I returned to my desk, trying to finish my slides there, but every small noise, a chair creaking in the distance, the faint chime of the elevator, set my nerves on edge. Eventually, I relocated to another meeting room on a lower floor. The new room was spacious, well lit, and comfortably warm. Everything went smoothly, no eerie cold, no strange noises. Yet, the memory of the showroom clung to me like a shadow. When I finally left the building that night, I exhaled deeply under the starless sky. But the images of shifting chairs and that bone-chilling cold lingered in my mind. Ending. Since that night, I have avoided staying late at the office whenever possible. I don't want to experience that unnatural cold, the weight on my shoulder, or the feeling that the chairs had a will of their own. I still work in the same office, but if I must stay late, I choose rooms near windows or in busier areas, anywhere but that meeting room. I never spoke much about what happened, fearing others would think I imagined it. But whenever I pass by that room after dark, my stomach twists in knots, as if it's waiting for me to step inside again. I don't know what truly happened in that space. The unexplained cold, the shifting chairs, the suffocating pressure. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't faulty equipment. It was something beyond logic. And if anyone ever tells me they feel uneasy in one of those empty meeting rooms, I will believe them without hesitation. The showroom remains there, silent and waiting. But I have no intention of ever going back to find out more. Midnight, bus stop. The rain was relentless, pouring down in heavy sheets as Koa stood shivering at the dimly lit bus stop. It was well past midnight, and the streets were eerily empty. His only company was the flickering street light, casting long, distorted shadows onto the wet pavement. As he exhaled, his breath turned into mist in the cold night air. He glanced at his phone. 12:45 a.m. The last bus of the night was due any minute now. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, eager to get home. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed her. A girl stood just a few feet away, silent and still. She wore a pale dress that seemed too thin for the biting cold. Yet, she didn't shiver. Her long black hair hung down, partially obscuring her face. But what unsettled Koa the most was her presence. He hadn't heard her approach. It was as if she had simply appeared. He tried not to stare, but something was off. The rain poured mercilessly, drenching everything around them. Yet strangely, she was completely dry. Not a single drop touched her. The air grew colder. Koa's unease deepened. He turned slightly to get a better look, and that's when he noticed something that made his stomach drop. She had no shadow. His pulse quickened. He averted his gaze, forcing himself to focus on the empty road ahead. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe he was just tired. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the rain drumming against the pavement. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "The bus is coming." Her voice was soft, almost melodic, yet it sent a shiver down Koa's spine. He swallowed hard, forcing a nod. Moments later, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness. The bus approached, its wipers swiping furiously against the downpour. As it pulled up, the driver's expression changed. His eyes widened in horror. He leaned forward, frantically waving his hand at Koa. "Don't get on! Run! Now!" Koa froze. The urgency in the driver's voice jolted his senses. He turned toward the girl, but she was staring at him now. Her face, once partially hidden, was now fully visible. Her eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to swallow the light. Her lips curved into an unnatural smile, and as she opened her mouth to speak again, her voice distorted, layered with echoes. "The bus is here. Let's go together." A paralyzing dread gripped Koa. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt cemented to the ground. Then, with a loud screech, the bus doors slammed shut. "Run!" the driver yelled one last time before speeding away, leaving them both in darkness. And then the girl stepped closer. Koa didn't think. He bolted. His feet splashed through puddles as he sprinted down the street. He didn't dare look back. The wind howled and the rain blurred his vision, but he didn't stop. Only when he reached the next street, panting and drenched, did he finally glance over his shoulder. The bus stop was empty. No girl. No sign that anyone had been there at all. His heart pounded as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. Who was she? Why had the driver been so terrified? Days later, unable to shake his unease, Koa did some research. Years ago, on a rainy night just like that one, a young woman had been waiting for the last bus at that very stop. The driver, exhausted and distracted, didn't see her standing too close to the curb. The impact was instant. She died on the spot. Since then, passengers had reported seeing a lone girl standing at the bus stop on stormy nights, always waiting, always dry, and those who spoke to her were never seen again. The shadow behind the curtain. The rain poured relentlessly as Daniel drove home, his windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the storm. It was nearly midnight by the time he pulled into his driveway. Exhausted from a long day at work, he hurried inside, shaking the water from his coat. As he closed the door, a flash of lightning illuminated the living room. That was when he saw it, a shadow standing behind the curtain near the window. It was faint, but unmistakable. A human figure, tall and motionless. Daniel's breath hitched. His wife Emily was supposed to be asleep upstairs. Perhaps she had come down for something? He called out, "Emily?" No response. The house was silent except for the rhythmic pattering of rain on the roof. Daniel stepped cautiously toward the curtain. His heart pounded against his ribs as he reached out and yanked it aside. Nothing. The window was locked. The shadow was gone. A chill ran down his spine. Maybe it was just his imagination, a trick of the light. Shaking his head, he turned off the living room lamp and headed upstairs. That night, Daniel had trouble sleeping. His mind replayed the image of the shadow over and over. He assured himself it had just been exhaustion messing with his senses. Then, at 3 a.m., he heard it. A faint creaking sound. He sat up, ears straining in the darkness. It came from downstairs, near the living room. Sliding out of bed, he grabbed his phone and tiptoed to the staircase. Peering down, he could barely make out the silhouette of the window. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room for a split second. The shadow was back. It was clearer now, sharper, a distinct human form standing just behind the curtain, as if watching the house from within. Daniel's stomach twisted in fear. He flipped on the hallway light, but by the time his eyes adjusted, the shadow was gone. He stood frozen, his breath shallow. This wasn't just exhaustion. Something was wrong. The next morning, Daniel told Emily about the strange occurrences, but she brushed it off. "You're just overworked," she said, sipping her coffee. "Maybe it's just the wind moving the curtain." But Daniel wasn't convinced. That evening, determined to prove himself wrong or right, he set up their home security camera, angling it directly at the window. If something or someone was there, he'd catch it. At exactly midnight, Daniel sat on the couch, watching the rain streak down the glass. Everything was quiet. He forced himself to stay awake, his gaze flicking between the curtain and the glow of his phone screen. 1 a.m. Nothing. 2 a.m. Still nothing. 3 a.m. Daniel's eyelids were heavy when the security app sent a motion detection alert. His pulse spiked as he quickly opened the footage. The recording showed the living room, dimly lit by the street lamp outside. For a moment, all seemed normal. Then, the curtain moved. No wind, no open windows, just a slow, deliberate shift. And behind it, the shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real. And this time, it moved. The figure stepped forward, emerging from the curtain's folds. It was tall, unnaturally thin, its head tilted slightly, as if listening for something. Then, without a sound, it turned toward the camera. Daniel's blood ran cold. The figure had no face, just darkness where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. Then, the screen went black. Daniel shot up from the couch, his heart slamming in his chest. He grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the living room, his hands shaking. The curtain was still. The room was empty, but the security camera had captured something undeniable. The next morning, Daniel checked the footage again. The last frame before the camera cut out showed something new. Wet footprints leading away from the window, trailing deeper into the house. Midnight, bus stop. The rain was relentless, pouring down in heavy sheets as Koa stood shivering at the dimly lit bus stop. It was well past midnight, and the streets were eerily empty. His only company was the flickering streetlight, casting long, distorted shadows onto the wet pavement. As he exhaled, his breath turned into mist in the cold night air. He glanced at his phone. 12:45 a.m. The last bus of the night was due any minute now. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, eager to get home. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed her. A girl stood just a few feet away, silent and still. She wore a pale dress that seemed too thin for the biting cold, yet she didn't shiver. Her long black hair hung down, partially obscuring her face, but what unsettled Koa the most was her presence. He hadn't heard her approach. It was as if she had simply appeared. He tried not to stare, but something was off. The rain poured mercilessly, drenching everything around them. Yet strangely, she was completely dry. Not a single drop touched her. The air grew colder. Koa's unease deepened. He turned slightly to get a better look, and that's when he noticed something that made his stomach drop. She had no shadow. His pulse quickened. He averted his gaze, forcing himself to focus on the empty road ahead. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe he was just tired. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the rain drumming against the pavement. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "The bus is coming." Her voice was soft, almost melodic, yet it sent a shiver down Koa's spine. He swallowed hard, forcing a nod. Moments later, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness. The bus approached, its wipers swiping furiously against the downpour. As it pulled up, the driver's expression changed. His eyes widened in horror. He leaned forward, frantically waving his hand at Koa. "Don't get on! Run! Now!" Koa froze. The urgency in the driver's voice jolted his senses. He turned toward the girl, but she was staring at him now. Her face, once partially hidden, was now fully visible. Her eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to swallow the light. Her lips curved into an unnatural smile, and as she opened her mouth to speak again, her voice distorted, layered with echoes. "The bus is here. Let's go together." A paralyzing dread gripped Koa. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt cemented to the ground. Then, with a loud screech, the bus doors slammed shut. "Run!" the driver yelled one last time before speeding away, leaving them both in darkness. And then the girl stepped closer. Koa didn't think. He bolted. His feet splashed through puddles as he sprinted down the street. He didn't dare look back. The wind howled and the rain blurred his vision, but he didn't stop. Only when he reached the next street, panting and drenched, did he finally glance over his shoulder. The bus stop was empty. No girl. No sign that anyone had been there at all. His heart pounded as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. Who was she? Why had the driver been so terrified? Days later, unable to shake his unease, Koa did some research. Years ago, on a rainy night just like that one, A young woman had been waiting for the last bus at that very stop. The driver, exhausted and distracted, didn't see her standing too close to the curb. The impact was instant. She died on the spot. Since then, passengers had reported seeing a lone girl standing at the bus stop on stormy nights, always waiting, always dry, and those who spoke to her were never seen again. The shadow behind the curtain. The rain poured relentlessly as Daniel drove home, his windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the storm. It was nearly midnight by the time he pulled into his driveway. Exhausted from a long day at work, he hurried inside, shaking the water from his coat. As he closed the door, a flash of lightning illuminated the living room. That was when he saw it, a shadow standing behind the curtain near the window. It was faint, but unmistakable. A human figure, tall and motionless. Daniel's breath hitched. His wife Emily was supposed to be asleep upstairs. Perhaps she had come down for something? He called out, "Emily?" No response. The house was silent except for the rhythmic pattering of rain on the roof. Daniel stepped cautiously toward the curtain. His heart pounded against his ribs as he reached out and yanked it aside. Nothing. The window was locked. The shadow was gone. A chill ran down his spine. Maybe it was just his imagination, a trick of the light. Shaking his head, he turned off the living room lamp and headed upstairs. That night, Daniel had trouble sleeping. His mind replayed the image of the shadow over and over. He assured himself it had just been exhaustion messing with his senses. Then, at 3 a.m., he heard it. A faint creaking sound. He sat up, ears straining in the darkness. It came from downstairs, near the living room. Sliding out of bed, he grabbed his phone and tiptoed to the staircase. Peering down, he could barely make out the silhouette of the window. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room for a split second. The shadow was back. It was clearer now, sharper, a distinct human form standing just behind the curtain, as if watching the house from within. Daniel's stomach twisted in fear. He flipped on the hallway light, but by the time his eyes adjusted, the shadow was gone. He stood frozen, his breath shallow. This wasn't just exhaustion. Something was wrong. The next morning, Daniel told Emily about the strange occurrences, but she brushed it off. "You're just overworked," she said, sipping her coffee. "Maybe it's just the wind moving in the curtain." But Daniel wasn't convinced. That evening, determined to prove himself wrong or right, he set up their home security camera, angling it directly at the window. If something or someone was there, he'd catch it. At exactly midnight, Daniel sat on the couch, watching the rain streak down the glass. Everything was quiet. He forced himself to stay awake, his gaze flicking between the curtain and the glow of his phone screen. 1 a.m. Nothing. 2 a.m. Still nothing. 3 a.m. Daniel's eyelids were heavy when the security app sent a motion detection alert. His pulse spiked as he quickly opened the footage. The recording showed the living room, dimly lit by the street lamp outside. For a moment, all seemed normal. Then, the curtain moved. No wind, no open windows, just a slow, deliberate shift. And behind it, the shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real, and this time, it moved. The figure stepped forward, emerging from the curtain's folds. It was tall, unnaturally thin, its head tilted slightly, as if listening for something. Then, without a sound, it turned toward the camera. Daniel's blood ran cold. The figure had no face, just darkness where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. Then, The screen went black. Daniel shot up from the couch, his heart slamming in his chest. He grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the living room, his hands shaking. The curtain was still. The room was empty, but the security camera had captured something undeniable. The next morning, Daniel checked the footage again. The last frame before the camera cut out showed something new. Wet footprints leading away from the window, trailing deeper into the house. The rainy night door. Newlyweds Min and Lan had just moved into an old house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't luxurious, but it had a certain charm. High wooden ceilings, antique furniture, and a cozy warmth that made it feel like home. However, from the very first night, something felt off. It was raining heavily when they went to bed. The rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the window lulled them to sleep, but at exactly 3 a.m., Lan woke up with a strange sensation. The air in the room felt colder, heavier. Then she noticed it. The bedroom door was wide open. Her heart pounded. She was sure they had locked it before sleeping. Carefully, she reached over to shake Min awake. "Min, did you open the door?" Still groggy, Min turned to look. He frowned. "No. Maybe the wind?" Lan didn't argue, but deep inside she felt uneasy. The next night, the same thing happened. This time Min saw it too. Before going to bed, he double-checked the lock, ensuring the door was secure. Yet, at 3 a.m., they woke up to find it ajar again. The third night, Min decided to take action. He set up a small camera facing the door, determined to find out what was happening. The storm outside was even stronger that night, the wind howling through the trees. They fell asleep, waiting for answers. The next morning, Min eagerly grabbed his phone to check the footage. At exactly 3 a.m., the door slowly creaked open on its own. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But then, as Min adjusted the brightness of the video, his blood ran cold. Standing in a dim hallway, just beyond the doorway, was a woman. She wore a long white dress, her dark hair hanging limply over her face. She stood motionless, staring directly into the room. Then, as if sensing she had been seen, her head jerked slightly to one side, and the screen suddenly distorted with static. Lan, looking over his shoulder, gasped. Who is that?" Min had no answer. That morning he checked the house thoroughly. The doors were locked, the windows shut. There was no sign of anyone breaking in. But as he walked past the bedroom door, a strange chill brushed against him, and for a brief second he swore he heard a whisper, "Let me in." That night, they decided to stay awake. Armed with a flashlight and their camera, they sat on the bed, waiting. The rain outside was relentless, hammering against the roof like an ominous drumbeat. The clock ticked closer to 3 a.m., and then the door creaked open. Lan clutched Min's arm. He raised the flashlight, pointing it toward the hallway. She was there. A woman in a soaked white dress, her face hidden beneath strands of wet, tangled hair. But this time, she moved. She stepped forward. The air in the room turned icy. Min scrambled for his phone to record, but the screen flickered and died. The lights in the room dimmed. The woman lifted her head slightly, and for the first time, they saw her eyes, empty, sunken voids filled with darkness. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, the rain outside seemed to grow louder, as if the storm itself was screaming. Lan couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed Min's arm, yanking him toward the door. But as they moved, the woman suddenly appeared inches from Min's face. Her lips barely moved, as she whispered, "You took my place." The next thing they knew, they were outside their house, drenched in rain, gasping for air. The bedroom window slammed shut behind them. By morning, they packed their things and left without looking back. They never spoke of that night again. Months later, a neighbor told them about the house's past. A woman had once lived there, waiting for her husband to return from war. Every night, she stood by the bedroom door, listening for his footsteps in the rain. But he never came back. One stormy night, overcome with grief, she stepped out into the rain and never returned. And now, whenever it rains at night, she waits, watching, waiting for someone to let her in. The knock at 3 a.m. It was a stormy night. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled through the empty streets. Lisa sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, curled up on the couch with a book. The ticking clock on a wall read 2:57 a.m. She yawned, ready to head to bed when knock, knock, knock. The sound was slow, deliberate. It echoed through the silent apartment. Lisa froze. Who would be knocking at this hour? Her heart pounded as she approached the door. Peering through the peephole, she saw a man standing in the rain. His hood was pulled low over his face, and his long raincoat dripped onto the welcome mat. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, waiting. Lisa's breath hitched. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent. She took a cautious step back, hoping he would leave. Knock, knock, knock. A shiver ran down her spine. The knocks were louder this time, more insistent. Lisa grabbed her phone, ready to dial 911, but paused. What would she say? That a man was standing outside? He hadn't threatened her. Maybe he was lost, seeking shelter from the rain. She checked the peephole again. He was still there, but this time his head was tilted upward. She couldn't see his face, only darkness beneath the hood. Lisa swallowed hard. She took another step back and held her breath. Minutes passed. The knocking stopped, but he didn't leave. The rain continued to pour, drumming against the roof, masking any faint sounds. Lisa strained to hear, but the silence outside was deafening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she dared to peek through the peephole once more. He was gone. Lisa exhaled, relief washing over her. Maybe he really had just needed shelter. Maybe he had moved on. Shaking her head, she locked the door and turned off the lights, determined to get some rest. The morning sun broke through the rain clouds. Lisa stretched, trying to shake off the unease from the night before. As she walked to the door, ready to check outside, she hesitated. Something felt off. Taking a deep breath, she unlocked the door and pulled it open. A gasp escaped her lips. The wooden surface of her door was covered in handprints. Dark, wet stains smeared across the wood, hundreds of them. Some small, some unnaturally large. They trailed from the peephole down to the handle, as if dozens of hands had desperately clawed at the door throughout the night. Lisa stumbled back, slamming the door shut. Her phone buzzed. A message from her neighbor, Mr. Harris. "Did you hear knocking last night? I swear I saw someone standing in front of your door for hours. But when I checked again, he was looking right at me." The call from myself. The rain pounded against the window as Sarah curled up on her couch, sipping a cup of tea. Thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the small apartment. It was nearly midnight, and she was alone, save for the flickering light of the television. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and froze. Her own name was displayed on the caller ID. Her own number. A chill crawled up her spine. This had to be a glitch, right? A scam call? But something inside her told her not to answer. The phone continued ringing, the shrill sound filling the room. Finally, hesitantly, she pressed the green button and brought it to her ear. Hello? Silence. Then, a voice. Her voice whispered, "Don't go outside. No matter what you hear, stay inside." Sarah's stomach clenched. Who is this? Static crackled on the other end, followed by slow, labored breathing. Then, the call ended abruptly. Sarah sat motionless, her heart thundering. It had sounded exactly like her own voice, down to the slight rasp she had when she was nervous. A loud knock at the door made her jump. 3 sharp, deliberate bangs. Her phone buzzed again. Another call from herself. She hesitated, staring at the door. The knocks came again, more insistent this time. She answered the call with trembling fingers. "I told you not to go outside," her voice hissed. "It's not who you think." Sarah's breath hitched. "Who is at my door?" Silence. Then, in a hoarse whisper, "Not someone. Something." A shadow passed beneath the doorframe. The porch light flickered, casting an eerie glow. Sarah's body tensed as a strange scraping sound echoed through the hallway like nails dragging along the wood. Her phone screen glitched, the numbers warping. The call ended on its own. She stumbled backward, heart hammering. The knocking had stopped. Slowly she reached for the peephole. Nothing. The hallway outside was empty. She let out a shaky breath and double-checked the locks. Maybe this was some sick prank. Maybe she was just imagining things. Then she noticed it. Something slipped under the door. A piece of damp, crumpled paper with a single sentence scrawled in red ink. "Do not answer the next call." Sarah's hands shook as she picked up the note. The ink was smeared. Or was it ink? Her phone buzzed. Another call. From herself. Tears pricked her eyes. This wasn't normal. This wasn't possible. She turned off her phone. The screen went black. She wasn't going to answer. But then, her landline rang. The old rotary phone in the corner, one she hadn't used in years, let out a shrill, piercing ring. Her stomach twisted. She didn't even know it was still connected. The room felt colder now, the air thick with something unseen. She stepped toward the phone, hesitated, then slowly picked up the receiver. The same whisper greeted her. "Now, you've made a mistake." The lights flickered. A gust of freezing air swept through the room, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. The television shut off, its reflection revealing something standing behind her. A tall, shadowy figure, watching, waiting. Sarah turned, but there was nothing there. Then the door creaked open on its own. Outside, the rain had stopped. The night was unnaturally silent. And on her phone screen, though it was powered off, one final message appeared. "I'm coming in." The black umbrella. The rain poured relentlessly as Emily hurried down the dimly lit street, clutching her coat tightly around her. The wind howled, making the cold seep deep into her bones. She had stayed late at work and now regretted it. The streets were nearly empty, and the only company she had was the occasional flickering street lamp. Then she saw it. A black umbrella lay abandoned in the middle of the road, completely open, despite the wind. It hadn't flipped inside out like most umbrellas would in such a storm. It stood firm, untouched by the raging weather. Emily hesitated. Who would leave an umbrella like that? Was it broken? Lost? She glanced around, but there was no one nearby. Something about it unsettled her, but the rain was unrelenting. With a sigh, she picked it up. As soon as her fingers grasped the handle, a shiver ran down her spine. The umbrella felt ice cold, as though it had been sitting in a freezer. Ignoring the discomfort, she held it over her head and continued walking. That's when she noticed. In the glossy surface of the umbrella's interior, she saw her reflection. But it wasn't quite right. Her face was there, but it wasn't mimicking her expression. While she furrowed her brows in confusion, the reflection of herself inside the umbrella was grinning, a wide, unnatural smile that stretched too far across her face. Emily gasped and nearly dropped the umbrella. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps as she stared at the distorted reflection. She slowly moved her free hand to her face, touching her lips, and yet the reflection did not change. The grinning version of herself inside the umbrella watched her, eyes wide with an eerie, knowing look. Then it moved. Not her, the reflection. It tilted its head slightly, still grinning, its lips parting as if it was about to speak. Emily's stomach twisted in horror. A whisper curled into her ears, though the wind had died down completely. "You shouldn't have picked me up." Her grip loosened, and the umbrella flew from her hands. It didn't tumble away in the wind. It simply disappeared, dissolving into the darkness. Emily stumbled backward, her breath hitching. She turned on her heels and ran. The rain felt heavier now, almost suffocating. Every puddle she passed reflected that same twisted grin, staring at her from the depths of the water. When she reached her apartment, she slammed the door behind her, panting. She felt a small relief, but it was short-lived. Drip, 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 water. She turned slowly. There, propped neatly against her umbrella stand, was the black umbrella. And in the reflection of the nearby mirror, her own face still grinned back at her. I am Carlos, a morning jog addict, always running before dawn when the sky is still pitch black and the sun has yet to rise. The park near my house is my usual destination, vast, quiet, with winding trails cutting through towering trees and damp grass. I love the crisp pre-dawn air, the occasional chirping of birds among the leaves, and the solitude of running while the rest of the world still sleeps. I always wear headphones, playing music just loud enough to drown out my own heavy breathing. Some parts of the trail have no street lights, with only a faint glow from distant lampposts. But I've grown accustomed to the darkness and every turn in the path. Everything began one morning as I jogged past the denser section of the forested area. My eyes drifted down to the soft dirt path and noticed strange footprints, not the neat, compact marks of a runner's sneakers, but larger, deeper imprints, as if left by an unusually wide, bare foot. They didn't follow a steady rhythm like those of someone running or walking, but were scattered, random, as if someone had wandered aimlessly. I stopped, took off my headphones, and shone my phone's flashlight to inspect them more closely. Under the pale white light, the prints became clearer, though some had faded where the ground was drier. A shiver ran through me. I told myself someone might have walked here the night before. But the park closes after sunset, and I had never seen anyone here at this hour besides myself. I put my headphones back on and continued running, but my mind kept circling back to the footprints. As I rounded a bend near the tall trees, I caught a glimpse of a shadow in the bushes, tall, thin, standing completely still among the interwoven branches. My heart pounded. I froze, raising my flashlight toward it. The beam swept across the area, revealing only the swaying shadows of trees in the wind, with no sign of life. I reassured myself it might have been a deer or a stray dog, though deep down I knew they didn't stand upright like a human. Turning my music up, I forced myself to shake off the unease and kept running. But as I reached the darkest part of the trail, a sudden scream tore through the silence, short, sharp, as if someone had cried out in pain before being abruptly cut off. I came to an immediate halt, my breath ragged, white mist escaping into the cold air. I whipped around, scanning the area, but there was no one. No footsteps, no movement. Only the wind rustling the treetops, and my heart thundering in my ears. Curiosity mixed with fear, and I decided to retrace my steps toward where I had heard the scream. Walking slowly, I swept my flashlight over every bush, every tree trunk. At the edge of the trail, I saw the footprints again, the same large, deep impressions, leading deeper into the woods. My pulse pounded as I followed them for a few meters, but the sharp snap of a dry branch under my foot made me jump. A cold sensation crawled up my spine, as if unseen eyes were watching me from the thick shadows ahead. I saw nothing but trees, yet adrenaline surged through me, urging me to turn back. I sprinted faster than ever, my breath ragged, afraid to look over my shoulder. That scream echoed in my mind, so vivid I couldn't tell if it had been real or a trick of my imagination. In the mornings that followed, I still ran at the park, but it was no longer the same. I became hyper-aware of everything. The strange footprints that occasionally reappeared, never in a pattern, sometimes near the trail, sometimes deeper in the undergrowth. I never saw the shadowy figure again, but the sensation of being watched clung to me like an invisible presence. One morning, as I ran, I heard the sharp crack of a breaking branch just a few meters behind me. The crisp snap made my body lurch into a sprint, sweat pouring down my back despite the cold, my heart hammering wildly. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to know what it was, human, animal, or something else. I only wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. Eventually, I gave up trying to understand it. I still run every morning, but I no longer stop to examine the footprints or strain my ears for unusual sounds. I run faster, keep my music loud to block out anything I don't want to hear, and avoid the darkest trails whenever possible. I've told no one about this, afraid they'd mock me for imagining things. But every morning, as I step into the park, a heaviness settles in my chest, as if at any moment I might hear that scream again, or see that tall figure step out from the trees. I tell myself it could have been a drifter, a large animal, or just my mind playing tricks in the dark. Whatever it was, I don't want to encounter it again. Ending. I still jog at the park, but the peace I once felt is gone. The strange footprints, the scream, and the lingering sense of being watched have left me with an unease I can't shake. I have no clear evidence, no answers, only lingering questions that haunt me every time I pass the forested part of the trail. I've learned to ignore them, focusing on my strides and breathing, but deep down, I know something isn't right about this place. I still love the early mornings, but now, every run feels like a battle to stay calm, and I can't help but wonder, will that shadow in the bushes ever step out into the open? I live on the 10th floor of an apartment building, in a unit at the end of the hallway, directly across from another apartment that, according to management, has been vacant for months. I'm not superstitious, nor am I particularly interested in ghost stories. But when strange occurrences started happening in that empty apartment, I couldn't deny the creeping sense of unease that settled into my every breath. It all started with a faint yellow light flickering beneath the door of the vacant unit. I had just stepped out of the elevator when I saw it. A dim glow in the dimly lit hallway, where the weak ceiling lights barely pushed back the darkness. The flickering was rapid, on, off, like someone was playing with the light switch inside. But no one lived there, so I assumed it was a malfunctioning light or a maintenance worker who had forgotten to turn it off. I stopped, watching for a few seconds. The light went out. Silence returned to the hallway. I shrugged, unlocked my apartment, and tried to brush it off, but a strange feeling lingered, like someone had been watching me from behind. That wasn't the only time. In the following days, the flickering light appeared more often. No set pattern, but enough to make me take notice. Sometimes it looked like the quick flare of a lighter, flashing briefly before vanishing. Other times it lasted longer, like a dying flashlight struggling to stay on. One evening, as I walked past, I heard a soft click, sharp, distinct, like a switch being flipped. My skin prickled. I turned around, staring at the door. Nothing, just silence. I told myself it was a wiring issue, maybe faulty electrical connections, and reported it to management. They promised to check, but a few days later, they told me everything was normal. And yet, the flickering continued, as if taunting me. Then the noises began. One night, while retrieving my mail, I heard the doorknob of the empty apartment rattle, clack, 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 as if someone was twisting it from the inside. I froze, my heart pounding, breath caught in my throat. Slowly I stepped closer and checked. Locked. No signs of forced entry. The rattling stopped, but the chill in my spine remained. I wondered if someone had broken in, secretly using the apartment, but there were no footprints, no strange smells, nothing out of place. The doorknob would rattle inconsistently, but every time it did, I felt an icy sensation at the nape of my neck, like unseen eyes were peering at me from the sliver of darkness beneath the door. Determined to find out what was happening, I took out my phone and started recording. Standing in the hallway, I aimed the camera at the vacant apartment's door, holding my breath. Within moments, the flickering light appeared again, a series of flashes clear on the screen. Then came the rattling, 3 sharp clicks before silence. Reviewing the footage, everything was there. The pale yellow light beneath the door, the crisp metallic sound. It wasn't my imagination. It was real. I showed the video to the building manager. He shrugged, saying it was probably an electrical issue or a loose lock. He replaced the doorknob and cut power to the apartment, ensuring there was no electricity running inside. But that night, the light flickered again, and the rattling continued. Undeterred by the supposed fixes, I invited Gabe, a close friend, to witness it with me. We stood in the hallway waiting. Sure enough, the light flickered, followed by the sound of the doorknob shaking. Gabe turned pale, admitting there was no logical explanation. especially since the power had been cut. We knocked loudly, tried turning the handle, nothing. But then, after knocking, we heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps. Thud, thud, just a few steps, then silence. I stumbled back, hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped my keys, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. Gabe grabbed my arm and pulled me toward my apartment, telling me to stop engaging with it. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I considered moving out, but the idea of relocating because of a haunted apartment felt ridiculous. I didn't want to admit I was scared. So I kept recording, collecting dozens of videos, but no answers. The manager insisted the unit was empty, and during daytime viewings it looked completely normal, just an unoccupied, spotless space. But at night, the flickering light returned, sometimes with a rattling doorknob, keeping me perpetually on edge. The hallway no longer felt like a simple passageway. It had become a threshold to something I couldn't control. Conclusion: now, I've learned to live with it, though never comfortably. I adapt by walking quickly down the hallway when I come home, avoiding direct eye contact with the door unless the noises force my attention. I keep my phone ready to record, though I've long given up on solving the mystery. The flickering light and rattling doorknob persist, not dangerous, but constant enough to keep me uneasy. I don't know if it will ever stop or if it will continue indefinitely. All I know is that I can't pretend it isn't happening. Living across from the vacant apartment has changed the way I see dark hallways and empty spaces. I'm still here, but every time the elevator doors open, I brace myself for that pale yellow glow or the soft clack of the doorknob, an enigma I dare not touch, yet cannot fully ignore. I started working the night shift at a large parking garage. The job seemed easy and simple. Sit in a tiny office, monitor the security screens, listen to the faint static of an old radio, and rely on a cheap desk lamp that flickered unpredictably. The garage had multiple floors above ground and 2 underground levels, but I never expected that the second basement would become a haunting memory I couldn't erase from my mind. It all began when I noticed that the cameras in the second basement frequently suffered from interference. The images on the screen flickered, blurred, and occasionally I would catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing near one of the concrete pillars. At first, I assumed it was just a technical glitch. Old surveillance systems often had issues, especially in damp, low-ventilated areas like the basement. But the phenomenon kept repeating itself, always around the same late hours, usually between 1 and 2 a.m. The figure resembled a human, but it was never clear, just a faint, hazy outline, like a ghost concealed within the static. I began to feel uneasy, unable to shake the growing sense of dread. Determined to check for myself, I left my office, grabbed a flashlight, and took the elevator down to the first basement before walking down the cold concrete ramp to the second. The air was heavy and cold, carrying the scent of oil stains and damp concrete. The dim overhead lights flickered, casting deep shadows that seemed eager to swallow everything whole. I approached the concrete pillar where the figure had appeared on the camera, sweeping my flashlight around. But I saw nothing except the rough concrete surface and a few dark oil stains on the floor. However, as I turned to leave, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye made me freeze. I spun around quickly, aiming my flashlight into the darkness, but there was nothing. Just silence, pressing in from all sides. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, sweat forming on the back of my neck despite the chilly air. I walked around the basement, inspecting every pillar and the few lonely parked cars, but I found no sign of anyone. Still, the unease never left me. The air felt thick, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. Then I heard it. A faint scraping sound like the slow drag of a shoe against the concrete floor. It was soft, but unmistakable. I called out, "Is someone there?" But only my own voice echoed back, bouncing eerily in the empty space. Then, inexplicably, a sudden draft of cold air brushed past me. Even though there were no windows or ventilation openings in the basement, my skin prickled with goosebumps, and I felt the distinct sensation of being watched from the shadows. My pace quickened as I made my way back to the elevator, glancing over my shoulder repeatedly, half expecting something to emerge from the darkness behind me. I reported the incident to my supervisor over the radio, but he merely shrugged it off, his static-laced voice dismissing it as a camera malfunction or the effects of exhaustion from working late. He told me to keep monitoring and not to make a big deal out of it. But the interference didn't stop. Every night, as the clock struck those late hours, the screen would distort and the shadowy figure would reappear, standing silently near the concrete pillar. I started dreading my basement patrols every time the elevator dinged and the doors opened to that level. My skin crawled, my throat went dry, and my grip on the flashlight tightened as if it were a lifeline. I would scan every inch with my beam of light, but I never saw anyone. Sometimes I would hear distant footsteps, light but deliberate, enough to send my pulse racing. Or the faint scraping noise again, but whenever I checked, everything was empty. One night, I decided to confront my fear. I stood in the second basement at the exact time the interference usually occurred. Near the concrete pillar, I held my flashlight low, trying to steady my breathing, despite the rapid pounding of my heart. The air was unnervingly still, the familiar scent of oil and damp cement thick in my nostrils. Then the scraping noise echoed again, clearer than ever, slow and deliberate, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my grip, but there was nothing. Then a gust of freezing air rushed past me, strong enough to make me shudder and send every hair on my body standing on end. I called out, "Who's there? Show yourself." But the only response was silence, heavy and oppressive. A primal fear overtook me, an unshakable sense that I needed to leave immediately. I bolted for the elevator, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly in the darkness. But nothing ever appeared. Back in the office, I rewound the security footage. As expected, the screen had been heavily distorted, and the shadowy figure had appeared right near my position. But the terrifying part was that, in person, I had seen nothing, not a single movement, not a trace of anyone. This realization sent a deep chill through me, as if whatever it was only existed within the camera's signal, invisible to the naked eye. I replayed the footage multiple times, zooming in, but the figure remained indistinct, forever trapped within the static, like a lost spirit caught between worlds. After that night, I avoided staying in the second basement for too long. When patrolling, I would rush through, checking each corner briskly, never lingering. Every time the elevator doors opened to that level, I would tense up, gripping my flashlight tightly, ready to retreat at the slightest sound. I told my colleagues and my supervisor about what I had seen, but they barely reacted. Some laughed, others waved it off as paranoia or technical glitches. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. The scraping sounds, the sudden gusts of icy air, and the shadow on the monitor were real. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. Ending. I still work the night shift, but I remain on high alert whenever the late hours arrive. I no longer try to understand what it is, whether it's a hidden intruder, a bizarre camera malfunction, or merely the tricks of an overworked mind. But every time the interference returns, adrenaline surges through my veins, and the second basement remains a place I never want to stay in for long. I do my job, complete my rounds, but I always keep an eye on the clock, counting down the minutes until whatever lurks in the darkness lets me pass. The second basement is no longer just part of the parking garage. It's an unsolved mystery, a presence I dare not confront, and perhaps never will. I stepped into Miguel's house late in the afternoon, carrying 2 bags of groceries, my heart a mix of excitement and doubt. The house was smaller than I had imagined, its walls stained, the narrow hallway seeming to swallow the light. The living room was covered in dust, its furniture old and worn, resembling an abandoned budget rental. But from the very first moment, I sensed something strange, an invisible current brushing against my skin. At the end of the hallway, I noticed a door, different from the others in the house. It was thicker, its paint dull and chipped, and, most importantly, it was locked. Miguel patted my shoulder and pointed to the second room on the right, saying that it was mine. As I passed the locked door, a chill ran down my spine. Not distinct, just a vague feeling that something was wrong. I ignored it, dragging my bags into my room. The room was simple. A single bed, a small wooden desk, a dusty window overlooking an overgrown yard. The bed sheets were clean, which eased my tension a little. After the long journey, I took a quick shower, changed, and decided to go outside for some fresh air. But as I passed the locked door again, I hesitated. The warped wood had left a small gap at the bottom, likely due to moisture. I crouched down and looked through it. Just for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of light inside. It wasn't steady, just a few flashes before disappearing. I told myself it was just a reflection from the window and dismissed it. In the kitchen, Miguel was chopping vegetables, his knife gliding rhythmically against the cutting board. I casually asked about the locked door, trying to keep my voice natural. He laughed, a strained, unnatural laugh, and said it was just a storage room filled with expired food cans and random junk. He claimed the key had been lost long ago and joked that he was too clumsy to fix things, so he just left it that way. I chuckled politely, but the flickering light I had seen lingered in my mind. I convinced myself it was just a car's headlights flashing through the window. That first night, I lay in bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. The hallway was pitch black, and the sound of old pipes dripped like a slow rhythm against the walls. I drifted in and out of sleep, jolted awake by strange noises. Sometimes a faint click, other times the slow drip of water. In the middle of the night, when I got up to use the bathroom, I heard a soft scratching sound from the hallway. My heart pounded. I held my breath and peeked out. Under the locked door, the light flickered again, on, off, like a Morse code signal from a distant place. I stood frozen, my breathing shallow, feeling as if someone inside was playing with a flashlight. Then, suddenly, the light went out completely. I slipped back into my room, locked the door, and lay awake, my mind racing with questions. What was Miguel hiding? Was there someone else in the house that I didn't know about? The next morning, I asked Miguel if he had entered the locked room during the night. He looked up, momentarily surprised, then shook his head and said he had slept like a rock. When I mentioned the flickering light, he shrugged, blaming old wiring in the hallway before quickly changing the subject to the weather. His avoidance irritated me, but I didn't push further. I was just a guest, and he was an old co-worker, trustworthy enough for me to rent the room at a cheap price. I went out to buy supplies, reminding myself that I would only be here for a few weeks. No need to make a fuss. But the unease clung to me like a shadow. On the second night, as I read under the dim lamp, I heard a low humming sound, like static from a radio stuck between stations. I turned off the light and listened. The hum grew louder, then softened again, seemingly coming from the locked door. I stepped into the hallway, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor. The humming now carried an eerie undertone, like a muffled voice, distorted in the static. I knelt and pressed my eye to the gap under the door. Nothing but murky darkness and faint, weak streaks of light. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, sweat prickling my skin. I reached for the doorknob, ice cold and unmoving. I twisted it hard, but it wouldn't budge. Then suddenly, the humming stopped. The light vanished. I stood in the dark, breathing heavily, too afraid to knock or call out. I returned to my room, locked the door, and curled up under the covers, my mind spiraling through possible explanations. Faulty wiring, rats running across the cables, or maybe some sick joke. The next morning, I confronted Miguel, telling him everything about the humming and the light. He smirked, saying I was probably half asleep, but I insisted I had been wide awake. When I suggested checking the room, he dismissed it outright, saying he didn't have the key and breaking the door would be too much trouble. I was frustrated and wanted to leave immediately, but I had already paid for the room up front, and my budget was too tight for a hotel. So I stayed, even as the atmosphere in the house grew heavier. During the day, I spent as much time outside as possible, walking, eating out, only returning when it was completely dark. The hallway started to smell damp, like rotting fabric or old paper soaked in water. The locked door looked even more worn, the peeling paint revealing scratches near the handle, as if someone had tried to pry it open. I pressed my ear against the door and heard a faint rustling sound, like paper shifting. I knocked gently. Silence. I listened again, only to hear my own breath. Then, suddenly, hurried footsteps thumped from inside. I jerked back, my hands shaking, sweat beading on my skin. I knocked harder, called out. But no one answered. Miguel wasn't home. I had no choice but to fix a quick meal, swallowing dinner with a heavy heart. That night, I made a decision. I grabbed my flashlight, crept to the locked door, and knelt down, shining the light through the gap. Inside, I glimpsed stacks of boxes, but the view was unclear. Then suddenly, a small light flickered, like it was responding to mine. My heart pounded, my throat dry. 3 flashes, then darkness, then a whisper, soft, chilling, like breath escaping from an invisible mouth. I tried the door again, still locked. Something moved inside, slow, retreating into the shadows. I whispered, "Is someone there?" No answer. I hurried back to my room, collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, my body trembling with adrenaline. Something was terribly wrong, but I didn't have the courage to break in. The next morning I told Miguel bluntly that I believed someone was in that room. I described the flickering light, the whispers, and the footsteps. He avoided my gaze, muttered about faulty wiring, and swore the door had been locked for years. I suggested calling a locksmith. He snapped, told me if I wasn't happy I could leave. I wanted to pack up right then, but my stubborn curiosity held me back. I agreed to stay until the weekend as planned. The following days, I ignored everything, stayed out late, only returning when exhausted. But every night, the light flickered, the static hummed, and the whispers echoed like voices from another world. I told myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew better. By the end of the week, I was irritable, jumping at every small sound, feeling like something was always watching. I questioned Miguel one last time, demanding the truth. He stuck to his story. Just old junk, just bad wiring, just my imagination. The day I left, I packed my bags, glancing at the locked door one final time. The paint was peeling, dust thick around the gap. As I walked down the hallway, I saw the light flicker once more. A weak, fading farewell. I didn't stop. I placed my keys on the kitchen table, pulled my suitcase outside, and boarded the bus out of town. I tried to leave the memories behind, but I never could. A few months ago, my uncle passed away, leaving me with a collection of old belongings, among them an antique mirror. It wasn't exactly to my taste. The frame was made of glossy black wood, intricately carved with a chaotic pattern, while the glass was murky, stained with blotches as if time itself had gnawed away at it. I had no intention of keeping it for long, but a sense of responsibility toward my family's heirloom made me hesitate. In the end, I hung it on the hallway wall between the living room and my bedroom, thinking it would add a touch of vintage charm to my otherwise plain house. The hallway was narrow, dimly lit by a yellow ceiling light, and I placed the mirror opposite a window so it could catch some daylight. Once I finished hanging it, I stepped back to examine my work. My reflection in the cloudy glass appeared slightly distorted, but I chalked it up to the antique nature of the piece. Still, an odd feeling passed over me, not quite fear, just something off. Everything changed after a few days. I began to feel as if someone was watching me whenever I walked past the hallway. It wasn't clear, just a small prick at the edge of my awareness, like invisible eyes clinging to the back of my neck. At first, I blamed work stress, but the feeling persisted, especially as the evening light faded. I started glancing at the mirror more often, stealing quick looks as I passed. Sometimes, just for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a shadowy figure behind my reflection. Not me, but a dark smudge, tall and thin, standing silently a few steps away. My heart pounded, my palms dampened with sweat, but when I looked closely, there was nothing, just the empty hallway reflected in the mirror. I told myself it was a trick of the light, or a flaw in the old glass, but the chill creeping down my spine was harder to dismiss. One evening, while washing dishes in the kitchen, I heard faint footsteps coming from the hallway. I lived alone, no roommates, no pets. I froze, the faucet dripping steadily into the sink. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, as if someone was walking barefoot on the wooden floor. I stepped out cautiously, the dim light from the window casting long shadows in the hallway. In the mirror, I saw a figure, not me. Tall, thin, motionless as a statue, its face blurred as if erased. I spun around immediately, but the hallway was empty, silent except for the rapid thumping of my heartbeat. I searched the entire house, turned on every light, but found nothing out of place. When I looked at the mirror again, it only reflected the opposite wall, as if nothing had happened. The image had been too clear to be a trick of the eye, yet I didn't know what to believe. The sense of being watched grew stronger. Every time I passed the mirror, a chill slithered through the air, as if something stood just behind me, exhaling softly against my shoulder. I tried to ignore it, to walk faster, but my eyes kept drifting toward the glass. One night, as I sat in the living room reading, I heard a tapping sound, light, rhythmic, like fingernails tapping against glass. It came from the hallway. I put down my book and stepped forward cautiously. The ceiling light flickered weakly. As I got closer, I noticed my breath misting faintly in the air, even though I was standing a meter away from the mirror. I reached out to touch it. The glass was ice cold. And then the tapping came again, sharper this time, as if it was coming from inside. I stumbled back, my breath ragged, unwilling to look for too long. For a fleeting moment, I swore I saw that shadowy figure shift within the mirror, but when I blinked, it was gone. That night, I had enough. I grabbed an old sheet and draped it over the mirror, tying it down so no gap remained. But the tapping continued, muffled but persistent, like something trying to make itself heard. The air in the house became heavy, suffocating, as if the atmosphere was being drained whenever I walked past the hallway. I could feel something there, not visible, not tangible, but always present. I decided to get rid of it. I called Nam, a friend who dealt in antiques, and told him I had a mirror to sell. I didn't explain everything, just said it didn't suit my home. He was eager to take a look, and even offered to buy it on the spot if he liked it. The day Nam arrived, I removed the sheet so he could inspect the mirror. It lay there, cold and silent. For a brief moment before it was taken away, I glanced at the glass one last time. The shadowy figure was there again, standing just behind my reflection, unmoving, as if waiting. I turned around. Nothing. A shiver ran through me, but I forced myself to remain calm as Nam examined the wooden frame and glass surface. He admired its craftsmanship, unaware of anything strange, and cheerfully loaded it into his car. As the mirror left my house, I felt as though a weight had been lifted from my chest. The hallway remained dim for a few more days, but the suffocating presence faded. Ending, I sold the mirror to sever the unease that had clung to me. Now, the hallway is empty, no shadowy figures, no tapping from the void. I try to return to normalcy, yet every time I walk past the spot where the mirror once hung, a fleeting chill brushes over me, as if my body remembers what my mind tries to forget. I don't know what the mirror held, just a trick of the mind, or something far beyond my understanding. All I know is that when it left, my home finally felt like mine again. I kept nothing else from my uncle after that, and I have no regrets. Some things belong to the past. Better left undisturbed. The rooftop. I work in a 30-story office building in the heart of the city, a sleek structure of glass and steel with massive windows and stark white hallways. My job often keeps me late, especially when project deadlines pile up. During the day, the building is bustling with life, but after work hours, it becomes eerily quiet. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the cold fluorescence of overhead lights remain. I usually stay late alone, or with a few colleagues, typing away in the empty office space. The rooftop is off limits, locked behind a heavy metal door that only maintenance staff have the key to. I've never been up there, nor have I ever wanted to. It all started with whispers around the office. Some employees claimed they had seen a figure lingering on the rooftop at night. Some said it was the ghost of a former employee who had jumped from there years ago. Others dismissed it as just the reflection of city lights on the glass. I didn't pay much attention. I didn't believe in ghosts, and these rumors sounded like nothing more than idle break room chatter. But one evening, as I sat alone in a meeting room reviewing documents, I glanced up through the large window. There, at the far end of the rooftop, barely illuminated by the dim glow of the streetlights, stood a figure. Tall, thin, motionless as a statue staring down at the traffic below. My heart pounded. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Nothing. Just the empty rooftop swallowed by darkness. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, or perhaps a tree's shadow shifting in the wind. But the cold shiver creeping down my spine told me otherwise. The next time I saw it, I was working even later than before, trying to finish an urgent report. I stepped to the end of the hallway to grab some coffee, and out of habit, glanced through the window. There it was again, clearer this time. It stood near the edge of the rooftop, its back to me, a dark silhouette against the foggy night sky. No wind, no movement, just an unnerving stillness. My hands trembled. The hot coffee burned my skin, but I barely noticed. I turned away quickly, forcing myself to focus on my screen, but the image remained lodged in my mind. To reassure myself, I called down to the security desk. "Has anyone gone up to the rooftop tonight?" I asked. The guard's reply was firm. "Number. The door is locked. No one is allowed up there after hours." I asked if he could check the security cameras. "The rooftop camera's been broken since last week," he said. "Hasn't been fixed yet." His words did nothing to ease my nerves. In fact, they only made things worse. Another time, I was working late with Hung, a colleague. We were editing a document together in the meeting room when I saw it again. I jolted, pointing toward the window. "There!" I gasped. Hung turned to look, but in that split second, it was gone. He laughed. "You're overworked, my friend. You're seeing things." I forced a chuckle, not wanting to argue, but deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I stayed late, I found myself checking the rooftop, waiting for the shadow to appear, and then, one night, I heard something. A faint tapping, software rhythmic, coming from above. I froze. My breathing grew shallow. The sound stopped. Then it started again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing across the rooftop. The door was locked. No one was supposed to be up there. But the sound was too real to ignore. I couldn't take the uncertainty any longer. One night, after finishing my work, I decided to check for myself. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and took the emergency stairwell to the topmost floor, the closest I could get to the rooftop. The metal door was massive, locked with a heavy padlock. There were no signs of forced entry. I pressed my ear against the cold metal. Only the sound of the wind whistling through the gaps. A sharp, metallic scent lingered in the air. I moved to a small window beside the door, shining my light onto the rooftop. Nothing. Just darkness, dust-covered fence, and the faint glow of distant streetlights. I exhaled in relief, ready to turn back. Then I felt it, a breath of cold air against my neck, a presence. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. Just my own shadow stretched against the hallway wall. Blood rushing in my ears, I practically ran back downstairs, grabbed my bag, and left the building without looking back. After that, I gave up trying to make sense of it. I stopped looking at the rooftop when working late. I wore headphones to drown out any strange noises. Every time I heard a faint knock or the floor creak, I told myself it was just the wind or the hum of the machinery. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I told a few coworkers about my experiences, but they only laughed. Some told me to get more sleep. Others joked that I should write horror stories. I had no proof, no photos, no videos, just memories of that unmoving shadow and the bone-deep chill that never quite left me. Ending. I changed my habits. I made sure to finish work early, leaving the office before the city was swallowed by night. If I had to stay late, I chose a desk near the exit, far from any windows that overlooked the rooftop. That dark figure remains an unanswered question, perhaps just a reflection, perhaps my mind playing tricks on me under the pressure of work, or perhaps something else, something I don't dare to name. Whatever it is, I don't want to know. The office is still my daily workplace, but now, every time the elevator shakes slightly, or the wind howls through the upper floors, a quiet unease settles in my chest. I don't seek the truth anymore. I just keep my distance from whatever might still be standing up there, silent, unmoving, watching.